Hello. So there's water next to everyone's chairs, and I think the order that we're going in, Christina, you have this run a show for them, right?
Ryan will walk in first, and then Senator Ernst, followed by Governor Ducey, and then yes, right next to the chair.
Right now? Do I need to? Go ahead. Thank you everyone for coming today. I know that we have many people at home who are live streaming joining us, and many people who took time this morning to join us for today's event. We're going to go ahead and get started with some introductions. My name is Danny Simon. I'm the President and CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to today's conversation on behalf of the Bastion Institute. The Bastion Institute was founded in 2022 with a primary focus on sparking discussion around America's weakening stance abroad and the need for the country to reemerge as the world superpower that it truly is. The Institute will focus on discussions around China, Russia, Iran, and American allies and more, and why these topics matter to Americans' daily lives. So what they like to do is summon the brightest minds from around the country to stimulate these ideas so that we can take those back and share those with our friends, families, and make sure we remember that when it comes time to vote. So with me today are some of these bright minds, and I'll start with those to my left. Now, of course, I've known the governor for a long time. I could introduce him in a lot of different ways, but I'll give a pretty standard introduction in case some of you haven't met him before. Governor Ducey was elected in 2014. He came from the private sector. He was the CEO of Cold Stone Creamery, so for those of you who love ice cream. Yeah, I heard it, yes. Prior to, especially when we hit summertime, it's always a much more popular line. Prior to post-Cold Stone, he came in, was facing $1 billion budget deficit. He set that right. He has pumped more money into the state's K-12 system. He's eliminated overburdensome regulations. He expanded school choice opportunities for parents in the state. And just recently, he has passed the lowest flat tax in the entire country. Thank you. Thank you. I like to say that Arizona now has the lowest flat tax, even lower than Texas and Tennessee and states like that as well, so which is factually accurate. We probably have the best, if not probably, we do have the best governor in the country. Tough crowd. Next, U.S. Senator Joni Ernst has dedicated her life to her state and country, having served in the military for over 23 years, and now representing Iowans in the United States Senate. Senator Ernst is working to grow a strong economy, stand up for Iowa farmers, families, and small businesses, whether it's energy issues or military. She holds Washington accountable and ensures strong national defense and supports our veterans. And she too has, I'm going to talk a little bit about governor. She too has a wonderful governor, Governor Kim Reynolds.
Yes, I do.
And she recently made us all proud with her response and rebuttal to the president's State of the Union address. So thank you for Governor Reynolds, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Danny.
And last and certainly not least, we have Ambassador Robert C. O'Brien, who served as the 27th United States National Security Advisor from 2019 to 2021. He is the co-founder and chairman of American Global Strategies, LLC. O'Brien served as the president's principal advisor on all aspects of American foreign policy and national security affairs. Prior to serving as NSA, O'Brien was a special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, serving as co-chairman of the U.S. Department of State Public-Private Partnership for Justice Reform in Afghanistan, and served as a U.S. representative to the 60th session of the UN General Assembly. And as a native Californian, it's worth noting that he too has a governor. But in all honesty, you wouldn't be sitting in the fastest growing county with one of the hottest economies in the country if it wasn't for his governor, Gavin Newsom. So we can say thank you for that. So please, guys, have a seat and let's get started. All right. So I believe we are going to start right away, Governor Ducey, with you in recent events. So this past week, a federal judge temporarily blocked the Biden administration's plan to terminate Title 42 at the end of next month. So it appears that the policy will remain in place, at least for now. What do you think is the right policy to deal with the border crisis? Should Title 42 remain in place, or is there a better, more sustainable way to address this mess?
So first, I want to say, Danny, thanks to the Chamber, and Sandra, thanks to the Commerce Authority for having us here today. I'm really honored to be on the stage with my friend, Senator Joni Ernst and Ambassador O'Brien. I've gotten to know them through our time in service and public life, and I'm excited we can have this discussion in Arizona, especially when it comes to border security. I've now served under 3 presidents. This is by far the worst president. Barack Obama deployed the National Guard to our border. Governor Jerry Brown, under President Donald Trump, deployed the National Guard to the border. This is the first president in modern American history that has not seen the rising crisis at the border, and it's worse than it's been in 40 years. So lifting Title 42 is a mistake. It's actually such a severe mistake, you would think for politics alone they would understand this. Over 2 million illegal crossings at our border, and those are the individuals that we have caught. Many of these are people of interest that have a criminal record or are on the terrorist watch list. Of course, there's a humanitarian crisis at the border that needs to be addressed. But why 26 other American governors signed up with myself and Governor Greg Abbott for the American Governor's Border Strike Force is because each one of our states today is a border state. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death among young people in southern Arizona. This is a poison that is being brought in by the cartels, and it's affecting the youth and fabric of our country. And we have a president and a vice president that have averted their gaze as to what is happening at the border. This doesn't need to be passed through Congress or the Senate, although I would love to see action there led by the president. But with the stroke of a pen, there are 10 policy recommendations that they reversed from the Trump administration, from Title 42 to migrant protection programs to remain in Mexico to the situation and agreements we already had with the Northern Triangle states of Afghanistan, Honduras, El Salvador, and Mexico. So this is something they're going to pay a very heavy price at the ballot box in November, but I think every governor would speak aloud along with people in the United States Senate, and it's not just Republicans that are speaking out on this. Both of Arizona's senators are outspoken on this. I heard Greg Stanton speaking out on this. So Title 42 would be a mistake, and one thing that we try to do in Arizona is really separate the border security discussion, which is a law enforcement effort, from the immigration reform discussion, which of course is going to happen in Washington, D.C. And in my mind, the only way to do this is to secure the border first, and then let's have the discussion around immigration.
Thank you, Governor. And you gave me a great transition to go to Senator Ernst. Understandably, immigration and border security consistently rank among the top issues for our voters here in Arizona. But as a senator of a non-border state, they do teach geography here in Arizona. How concerned are you with Title 42 and border policy in general? And what should non-border states be paying attention to?
Oh, thanks, Danny. Yes, and Governor Ducey laid it out just perfectly when he said that every state is now a border state. And even in Iowa, we feel that we are a border state, and we're not obviously seeing the effects that some of your ranchers and your farmers are, your local communities along the border, but we are seeing those immigrants that are being moved from the border and flown in the dead of night, or as Jen Psaki would call it, early morning flights. They have been brought into Iowa. And we have not been able to determine who was on those flights and where they were headed. All we know is that it was paid for by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and that's all we'll get from the administration. But there is a national security component to this. When you have an open border, you don't know who is entering your country. And Governor Ducey pointed out that there are those that are on watch lists. And we know that there are at least 23 that have been identified on a terrorist watch list, which means that there is reason for them not to be allowed to enter into the United States. And we saw in a hearing yesterday in the House where Secretary Mayorkas was not able to answer whether those people that were on the terror watch list had been expelled from the United States. He couldn't answer that. These are people that we suspect of having ill regards or ideas against the United States, and yet we don't know if they have been pushed out of the United States of America. That is a concern to us. To have a sovereign country, you have to have borders that are controlled. And right now, we do not have a border that is being controlled. When it comes to the issue of fentanyl, there was enough fentanyl interdicted at the border that would kill every single American in the United States. I dare anyone to say that that is not a pressing issue. So we really do have a crisis. We need to make sure that we are controlling the border. I do agree that we have to. As a Congress, if it cannot be handled by the administration, as a Congress, at whatever point we can, we need to step forward then and send a bill to President Biden to make sure that we are securing the southern border. And you're absolutely correct, Governor Ducey, that there are 11 Democrats in the Senate that have publicly stated they do not believe that the president should be lifting Title 42. At a time when the president is appealing the mask mandates on planes, we also see him saying we don't need to worry about a public health crisis at the border. It's very contradictory, and we need to make sure that we are controlling who is entering into the nation, especially if he believes there is still a pandemic, enough so where we need to wear masks on planes. So we do have to pay attention to this, and I'm glad that we are able to have that discussion here today.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Mr. Ambassador, how does this chaos on our southern border impact our national security?
Well, so that's a great question. Before I answer that, I just want to comment. Flying in yesterday and seeing how all the new buildings and the construction and how great and clean Phoenix looks, Governor Ducey, you've done a terrific job. And coming from California, I was actually telling one of the guys on my security detail, this looks like California used to. And so it was sobering as a Californian, but I'm sure happy for the people of Arizona. You've done a great job, and it was a privilege to work with you and your team when I was in office. And I couldn't count on anybody more than Senator Ernst. I mean, she doesn't look like it, but she's a combat veteran. She's one heck of a tough woman, and she did a great job for us on all issues. Every national security issue, she was, Senator Ernst and Senator Cotton, they were Senator Lee, they were first phone calls of mine, and thank you for all the support that you gave us. And we got a lot of great things done for the country, and I think now people are kind of, Democrat friends of mine are kind of quietly coming over and saying, hey, we miss you. It was a lot better. And there's no place that's more of an issue than at the border. And what folks don't understand about the border is it's not an immigration issue. The Democrats are conflating border security and the immigration issue for political wins, and it's a national security issue. We have traffickers, and when we talk about traffickers, it runs the gamut. So number one, you've got your drug traffickers and these cartels, and they have so much money, they've made so much money selling fentanyl and cocaine and marijuana and all of their illegal drugs and that are killing 100,000 Americans a year in places like Iowa and Arizona and Utah and Idaho and the middle of the country. It's not just a border issue. So you've got those guys, and by the way, a lot of that illegal fentanyl is coming from China. So it's manufactured by Chinese cartels, and then they're selling it to Mexican and Central American cartels who are bringing it over the border. But you've also got people trafficking humans, and there's terrible trafficking that's happening for illegal labor, people that are being paid horrible wages, and then you have the sex trafficking that's just unspeakable with women and children, and this is happening on a regular basis. And so you've got all the traffickers taking advantage of the border situation, and this is just a filthy stream of wrongdoing that's coming over our borders almost unchecked. But then you add into it, as the governor and the senator pointed out, we've got folks that are coming in from Iran, from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Russia, from China. Now, my hope is that these are people that are trying to escape those regimes. They're terrible regimes, and I'm sure some of them are. But we also know that all those regimes target the United States, and they want to infiltrate either terrorists or folks that can run espionage cells or terrorist cells. Whether it's Hezbollah, we got Lebanese that are coming over that are actual Hezbollah members that have been caught at the border. So we've got to get control of the border. And then the other thing I'll say, it's a public health situation. So if anyone's traveled overseas, you know that within 24 hours of getting on the plane, you've got to have a COVID test, and you wear a mask on the plane. And overseas or even coming back in, people want to see your vaccination card. You can't go to a restaurant in certain cities without a vaccination card. At the border, there's no vaccination cards. There's no testing. There's no PCR test. There's no mask. It's wide open. And so we've got a public health issue, we've got a trafficking issue, and we've got a national security issue. And all those things are combining to overwhelm the folks at the border. And I'll just finish with one quick comment about what we did at the outset of COVID. I got together with Bill Barr, and we were very concerned about, as we shut down the country, with the traffickers trying to take advantage, the cartels trying to take advantage of that. And we were concerned that they would try and move into the country and move a lot of their goods into the country and warehouse them here, and then have product to sell for 2 or 3 or 4 years, because these guys they understand supply chains, and they've got accountants and businessmen, and the money that they make. We found tunnels that have hundreds of millions of dollars in $100 bills stacked up as far as you can see down tunnels. And so they know business. And so we decided we're going to put Coast Guard ships, and unfortunately we didn't have enough cutters, but we got the Navy involved and roped them in. And then we got the Dutch to give us a frigate in the Caribbean, and we got the British to give us one of their frigates. And I think we had 9 ships in the Eastern Pacific along the California Baja border, and then we had I think we had 2 ships there, and I think we had 7 in the Caribbean. We seized over $4 billion in cocaine above the normal baseline. So that's above what we were regularly seizing. We seized $4 billion in cocaine as the traffickers tried to take advantage of COVID to push their product into the country. So this is real. Anyone who tells you that this isn't real, or this is a social issue, or an immigration issue, it's not. It's a life or death issue for Americans, especially American kids across the country. So thank you for your leadership, Governor and Senator. Thank you. We need that legislation that you're talking about. And with 11 votes, that sounds like 61 votes to me. That sounds pretty good for those of you who can't vote.
And if I can make a comment to that as well, because we do have 11 Democrats that have been vocally supportive of not allowing the Biden administration to lift the mask or the Title 42 mandate at the southern border, because they have spoken out now. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer is not bringing up that COVID package because he knows that there are 11 Democrats that will support. So it would put a lot of Democrats in a very bad position. So he's simply not bringing it up. What's that?
None of them are up for re-election.
Oddly enough, many of them are up for re-election, but they are doing the right thing by speaking out about this issue. They know that the border is a serious issue, and we've all heard that it could be up to 18,000 a day that would be interdicted.
You're right. Senator Ernst is right. Secretary Mayorkas's numbers, Department of Homeland Security, is 18,000 additional migrants a day. You can do the math. That's 6.5 million migrants in the next year. We're in the worst crisis of the last 4 decades, and we're only at 2 million. So this is a completely unsustainable number, and that's why the judge's order on Title 42 will give us a slight reprieve in the current crisis that we have right now. And I'm so encouraged to hear both these leaders separating out border security from immigration. As you've watched this debate over the past decade, you can almost see that it's been a tool of the left to combine these. And so much of the East Coast media, even some of our folks in the media here in Arizona, continually refer to this as an immigration crisis. This is not an immigration crisis. This is a border security crisis. So if we can separate that out of it, and I'll tell you right now, there isn't an employer in Arizona, in Iowa, or any place in the country that doesn't need workers. Everyone in our country right now that wants to work is working. And the way we've solved this issue in the past is through immigration. But there is no appetite for immigration while our border remains wide open and unprotected.
That's true.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Ambassador. What impacts, because you touched on supply chain already, so let's just move right into that. What impacts do international supply chain issues have on national security? Are these two related?
No, they're very related. One of the things that was a huge wake-up call for the United States of America was when COVID hit. And we realized all of our PPE, our masks, our gowns for our surgeons and first responders, our goggles, but not just at the low end, our pharmaceutical products, our medical devices, it was all coming from China. China had a stranglehold on us. And somehow, this country allowed itself to hollow out our manufacturing. And that's just on the medical side. On the chip side, for silicon chips, for whether it's military application to medical devices, down to the TV you watch, or the smart dishwasher you've got in your home, your car. There's been a backup of you've probably seen the photos of massive lots of SUVs sitting waiting for that final chip to go in. So we've allowed our supply chain to be outsourced. And look, it's one thing if it's outsourced to allies. I mean, the Dutch aren't going to cut us off. And during COVID, whether it was Mexico or manufacturing in the Caribbean or South America or Europe, we were always able to get the components we needed. But if it was in China or if it was in Russia, heaven forbid, we couldn't get those components. And so we need to onshore to the extent possible. And the governor's been a leader here. Danny with the Chamber of Commerce has been a leader here. It's terrific to see that Intel is going to build a massive factory and fabrication plant here in Arizona. I think there's talk that TSMC, the Taiwanese, are going to do the same thing. But we're at serious risk. And when you think about, just going back to chips for a moment, the chip supply chain really begins and ends in Taiwan right now. 90% of the high end, the super small chips, I think the 7 and 9 nanogram chips are made in Taiwan. And the Chinese, Xi Jinping, has said he's been watching Ukraine very closely. He wants to do to Taiwan what Putin has tried to do to Ukraine. And if we lose Taiwan and lose our chip making ability there, the United States is China will have a stranglehold over our economy. And so we've got to onshore our supply chain, but we've also got to nearshore our supply chain. So there are just certain things that are going to be too difficult to manufacture here. But there are places like Vietnam and the Philippines and Thailand and other American treaty allies, a lot of our allies in Central and South America, which would deal with a lot of the immigration issues that we're seeing with people wanting to flee those countries. They can do a lot of the manufacturing. So we've got to encourage American companies to buy from either made in the USA or made components that are made in trusted partners and friends. And when that's what will cure the supply chain ills that we're worried about, Danny, because right now we're just too overexposed and we're too dependent on China and for chips and manufacturing. And then, as we've seen with the crisis in Ukraine, and not just the U.S., but our allies have been dependent on Russia for energy, and whether it's LNG or oil and gas, other derivative products. So we've got to get that supply chain back to trusted providers. And I think Arizona's plays a key role there.
It does. Fantastic. Mr. Ambassador, I would say you mentioned that you believe that Taiwan is semiconductor, is building one. They in fact are. I would encourage, if you have the time, drive up I-17. You'll see just how large that facility is going to be. We're very proud of that. I think one of their officials is in the room, so I'd be remiss if I didn't point out they are way underway with that facility, and we're very proud of them and happy to have them here in Arizona. Senator Ernst, at the Chamber, we deal with this question a lot. What is the proper role of government in the economy at all? So as we talk about globalization and a lot of what the ambassador just said, what is government's obligation to address issues like global competitiveness, and what is the government's role to address supply chain and the China challenge as a whole?
Yeah, it is a great question because I do get this a lot as I'm traveling across Iowa as well with our manufacturers. And our role as a federal government should be making sure that we are actually encouraging American innovation, American industry. But what we have seen in the current administration under President Biden is that he is really over-regulating. And that in turn inhibits innovation and industry in the United States. We were just talking about the chip issue, and a lot of those rare earth minerals that are necessary for the components we haven't developed those resources in our own country or assisted our allies with their efforts as well. We can look at Afghanistan, where a number of those rare earth minerals exist. We completely left Afghanistan with no plan in place for protecting those types of rare earth minerals. Who is developing that now? It is China. We can look at Chile, where there are numerous rare earth minerals that could be utilized by the United States, but the United States has just not engaged with their government or development in that country. So we've really taken a hands-off approach other places, knowing that we need these items to really develop here in the United States. And if we go back to the minerals that we do have available to us in the United States, of course we have to develop and go through mining activities. But when you have a government that is so prohibitive when it comes to mining and drilling activities, we are not going to keep up with our near-peer competitors. We have a risk-adverse administration. And they are being driven by what I would say is almost a deranged climate policy, which is really stopping us from developing what we need to develop to keep up with others in this day and age. So the CHIPS Act, I know, is a big one that is coming through Congress. We really do need to develop our own resources here in the United States of America. And as the ambassador said, then if we are not able to do it here in the United States, turn to trusted allies and partners. We must do that. It should be America first, but not America alone, because we do have some allies that are doing these types of activities where our president is not allowing us to develop here in the United States. So I think there is a big push at the federal government level, at least among some of us, to develop what we can here. Let's unleash American innovation. And we can't do that in the current circumstance when there's so much over-regulation that many businesses will say it just doesn't make sense to invest when we're being so heavily over-regulated.
Can I jump in and say one quick thing about Iowa? So everyone knows Iowa grows things. I was surprised. I took a couple of trips to Iowa during the administration for non-political reasons. I'll make that clear. And they've got a burgeoning tech sector that's really impressive there. And the Iowa National Guard has a cyber unit that we use nationally to protect our election infrastructure. Coming out of Des Moines and Dubuque, and so. Iowa, I give a shout out to Arizona. Senator Ernst's home state as a burgeoning tech sector that's quite impressive, and your National Guard, as you know, having served there, has a great cyber capability as well. So,
if I can build on that as well, that is another area outside of the regulation piece where the federal government can be involved, and we have had China hacking into state actors, we'll say, other state actors. We've seen, Russia, others. We have seen incidents of the Colonial Pipeline. We have JBS in Iowa, which is a large food producer. They had cyber attacks on them, ransomware attacks, and the federal government just really turned a blind eye to it. And they said, you folks just take care of it yourself. And they had to pay out $5 million to get their systems back. So that is where we can actually take a step forward as a federal government and really work with private industry and figure out the right way to handle those cybersecurity attacks. Because a lot of small businesses, when it comes to cyber insurance, that's a new area out there, cyber insurance. I've had so many small businesses say they can't pay, they can't afford that cyber insurance. So this is an area we will have to tackle as a federal government. We don't have a 100% solution, but there should be a role in how we can push back, whether we're assisting those small businesses or working with others, especially when it comes to issues like a pipeline or food security.
Thank you. This next question is going to sound, in the sports world, what they would call it like a homer question, but I promise it's not. But Governor Ducey, can you briefly touch on Arizona's booming manufacturing sector and just why it's so fantastic here, and how semiconductors figure into our amazing growth? I didn't write it. It just comes to me.
Well, but before I do, I want to really amplify and say how well said this discussion was on supply chain in China, and it does have something to do with what's happening in Arizona. But I think it's important to note, whether it's at the federal level, the international level, or the state level, that China is a bad actor, that this great powers rivalry will confront us for the rest of our lives, and they are not our friends. And as someone that believes in free enterprise and the strength of the market, I know that the intentions were good ones here when we thought that trading partners would become allies and friends. But COVID-19 exposed that that was simply not going to happen. In addition to the human rights tragedies that we're witnessing in China, the way they've co-opted so much of our business community to bend to their will. So in Arizona, our first example, I came from the private sector, as Danny mentioned. I actually ran on a platform that I had built built a business. Now I wanted to shrink a government and build an economy. So we've been focusing on this from day one. I'm fortunate to have the best commerce chief in the country in Sandra Watson. And our first big win was a company called Lucid Motors. It's an electrical vehicle manufacturer. After you go up north to see Taiwan Semi, you can go down south to Pinal County and see these electric vehicles rolling off the line today. And this is a company that looked at 13 different states and 60 different markets. I'm much more comfortable talking to CEOs and business leaders than I am talking to some state legislators. So I did all these interviews. Rick Perry told me this is how they built the juggernaut in Texas, and I just thought I'd take the mantle as the governor that would show up to these types of competitive situations. The last question with Lucid was, how's your relationship with Mexico? We hadn't had a chief executive in Mexico for nearly a decade before I was elected. It was my first visit as a newly elected governor. It was my first visit as a re-elected governor. Mexico's our #1 trading partner. So I think the real opportunity here is, in a clear-eyed way, to recognize China for what they are and to repatriate our manufacturing back to North America. I would like to repatriate it to Arizona. If not Arizona, then Iowa, or the other 48 states. But if not those, then to Mexico or Canada, because a strong North America is going to be a more prosperous, peaceful, and powerful North America. And we really do have these opportunities, and probably the crown jewel in economic development in Arizona in the last decade is Taiwan Semi coming to our state. But it's not only good for Arizona, it's good for our country. I think so much of our nation is just now starting to understand. We understand how important electricity is and how important the internet is and even how important energy is. But I don't know that people really understand what semiconductors power in terms of the future, from our phones to our cars to our kitchen appliances to our national security. And that most important partner is now in the United States. So if China were to make a bad decision and be an aggressor on Taiwan, there is safe haven in Arizona for their engineers and the top minds of Taiwan Semi, and we should start thinking that through ahead of time. In addition, and I'll close with this price of gas, inflation, and what's happening in energy and on climate. We have so many of these rare earth minerals right here in the United States. Listen to Spencer Cox talk about the unlocked riches in the state of Utah. And these rare earths are also used in all the components that we just talked about. And I think we all care about the environment here. We all know that innovation and new technologies can help solve some of those issues. But it wasn't all that long ago on the previous administration that we were actually in a position where we were energy independent in the United States and selling energy to our friends. Today, we are buying energy from our enemies. We have put Vladimir Putin in a position where he could make this horrendous decision, and we're going to be paying for it for some time as we help Ukraine solve this situation with our support and resources. But this is all a result of what you see are bad, short-sighted political policies versus the idea of putting our country first, making sure that we're taking care of our citizens, our friends, and our allies, and welcoming others into that community of nations that love freedom and liberty.
Well, thank you, Governor. You breached the topic of China, so I'm going to go ahead and ask this question down the line, starting with you, Senator Ernst. How do we balance our trade relationship with China and China's record on human rights? And what are things we should be doing to curb China's reach, specifically when it comes to the conflict with Taiwan? So we'll start with you, Senator Ernst, go to the ambassador, and come back to the governor.
We do a lot of trade with China, no doubt about that. But just as the discussion that we've had this morning has pointed out, we do need to start bringing some of those unnecessary items of manufacturing back to the United States. Those essential items that we found during the pandemic were large in part controlled by China. They are a competitor. They are a near peer competitor. And so when we need those items, we need to have them here. So we have seen in Iowa this balancing act. As many of you might know or understand, Iowa has had a delicate relationship with China for decades now, going back to the 80s, where we did host, who is now President Xi Jinping, in Iowa on an agricultural trip to Iowa. We have this incredible ag trade partnership with China. They purchase a lot of our pork, our soybeans, our corn. They need us. China needs us, and that's what we need to really hold on to, is the fact that they can't feed their own people without relying on other countries. So we should be using that as leverage. But what we have seen from China is a very adversarial stance where they are taking intellectual property and seizing it. We see that they have, in Iowa even, who they would consider maybe more friendly towards them, we have seen them attempt to steal seed corn out of the soil. They actually dug up seeds out of the ground to try and take back and reverse engineer in China so that then they wouldn't have to rely on Iowa innovation. They could just develop it on their own. They do the same with everything that we manufacture here, ag equipment, pharmaceuticals, you name it. They will do that in China. So we do need to make sure that we are holding them accountable when it comes to intellectual property theft. And of course, maintaining tight control of any article that goes into our national security. This has been an issue with Huawei in the past, where we have seen that go all around the globe, but we do not want those products in our own national security infrastructure. So there are things that we have to do to protect our national security, our citizens here, and then still maintain a balance of trade, but again, holding them accountable. And we've seen that in the last administration as they work through the China trade bill. But China will always be an adversary, and we need to recognize that and understand. They are spreading around the globe through their Belt and Road Initiative. And we've had this military pivot to the Indo-Pacific. It's what, the Indo-Pacific region. But I just spoke with former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates the other day, and he said, maybe we need to leave that in the rearview mirror, because we have to acknowledge that while we're pivoting to a region, China is everywhere. China is everywhere now. They are in our own backyard. They are in South America. They are gaining entrance into countries with the Belt and Road Initiative. 31 out of 34 countries in South America now pivot to China for their trade and economy, supportive economy. That's very concerning. So we need to pay attention to China and what they are doing through trade, through military exchanges, all of that. And we need to be able to compete on a global scale against China. So that's what we need to pay attention to when it comes to China and our relations with them.
Yeah, and I think on the trade front, we've got to be very cautious because as former or current director of the FBI, Chris Wray, said in a speech, and we did a series of 4 speeches. My speech on China was here in Arizona, and the governor was kind enough to introduce me at that speech. This is the biggest, the intellectual property theft that Senator Ernst talked about is the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. Now think of that. The biggest transfer of wealth that's ever taken place in 7,000 years of recorded human history has been China stealing our innovation, stealing our intellectual property, denying the license fees and the patent fees and that sort of thing to the inventors here, but then undercutting them, dumping those products back here and putting those companies out of business. So not only did the inventor lose his license fees and his right to an income stream from his invention or her invention, but she's also lost her business because the Chinese rebuilt the companies, rebuilt the products, and then dumped them here and undercut the U.S. company and put them out of business. I mean, it's shocking what we've allowed to take place. And we tried to address it in the Trump administration with the Phase 1 China deal, and then COVID came, and the Chinese, of course, like they do every trade deal, totally ignored it. But there's a moral component that goes beyond just the competition with China and their theft. The moral component is that we're buying products that are made with slave labor. Think about that. In 2022, we're buying products that are made in Xinjiang, China, by Uyghurs, males who've been taken from their homes. They've been replaced by Han Chinese nationals who are now living with their wives and their kids. Secretary Pompeo at the end of the administration called it a genocide. And so we passed legislation so that there's a presumption now that any product that comes from the Xinjiang region there's a presumption that it's made with slave labor and it's denied at the port of entry. But think about Tibet. Tibet used to be a cause célèbre of the left. I mean, remember Richard Gere and the Dalai Lama and all that sort of thing? But the Democrats have been totally co-opted by China, or many of them have. The Wall Street, the NBA, the Hollywood certainly. And so you don't hear about Tibet. And then you think about Hong Kong and the protesters there who are protesting for freedom. Now remember, the Chinese promised one country, 2 systems. And that was supposed to last for 50 years. It didn't last 25 years. And the poor Hong Kong protesters were rounded up and thrown in jail and can't get out of Hong Kong. And then you have, we touched on the genocide in Xinjiang. And now we have our friends in Taiwan. And Taiwan's one of the great democratic success stories of the 20th century or 21st century. It's right up there with South Africa. It went from an authoritarian country to a fully democratic country. Led by President Tsai Ing-wen. And it's a great, they love Americans there. It's a great place to visit. If you haven't been to Taiwan, go visit. A, you'll have a great time, and B, it'll send a message to the communists in the mainland. But they don't deserve to be taken over by the Chinese Communist Party. They don't want what's being offered. They don't want to drink the Kool-Aid that Xi Jinping, and by the way, if you're in Shanghai now, and you can't leave your house, and you're having a metal cage put around your house because you might have COVID, and you can't get a real vaccine, you've got to rely on a fake Sinovac vaccine that's less than 50% efficacy. You don't want what they're selling. And so we've got a very expansionist power that's violating all norms of human rights. And I think it's going to be harder as people watch what Russia is doing in Ukraine, as they watch Bucha and are becoming sensitized again to these war crimes and what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. I think people are going to start looking at Taiwan and say, why are we condemning the Russians? Why are we doing everything we can to help the Ukrainians, but we don't care about the Uyghurs and we don't care about the folks in Hong Kong, and we're not doing enough to help our friends in Taiwan? And so I think you're going to see a sea change that's happening. And I think that sea change and I think you're seeing it in Europe as well, even with countries like Germany that normally put commerce first above human rights. I think you're going to see not only a decoupling because of the economic necessity of bringing our supply chain home, I think you're going to have people just say, you know what, I don't care if the phone's a little bit cheaper, or I don't care if the fishing pole at Walmart's a little bit cheaper. I'm not going to buy something that was made with slave labor, or I'm not going to buy something that was made in a Communist Party factory and support the people that are going to be potentially fighting our kids who are serving as sailors, airmen, Marines, soldiers, and Coast Guardmen in a future war. I'm not going to be part of that. And so I think that human rights concern is also going to drive a decoupling.
Any country that will strip and steal everything that's on your phone before you get out of their airport is not our friend, and is not someone we should be encouraging further trade on. I think one thing that we know is that we live in the single greatest country in the world, and there are rivals out there for what we have. And China has taken a page out of our book in a market economy that has provided some level of real power and purchasing capacity for their citizens. But our citizens enjoy the highest standard of life on the globe, and it funds our mighty military. It gives us the persuasive powers that we have around the globe, and we need to look to keep and grow and protect that economy. And yes, we do have relationships, and we need to be clear-eyed about how we handle that. But we should be expanding and working with our partners and our friends, figuring out who the good actors are, what can be done here. And some of this is just going to be the very tough decisions and discussions, not only from the national security perspective and the federal government's policy, but business leaders around our country who have all their growth and worth due to our free market capitalist system. And we have to differentiate that from what's happening around the world with big government socialism and what's happening with bad actors who are co-opting a portion of that market economy, but are using bad policies like slave labor that are inhumane. And this is just something that is going to have to be continually put forward by people that want to protect and grow our system.
Thanks, Governor, Ambassador, and Senator. All good answers. I'm going to move on to a little bit across the continent and start with you, Senator Ernst, because I noticed your lapel pin for this question. You had the Ukrainian flag on. Is the U.S. doing enough when it comes to the war in Ukraine? And because we seem to be becoming more and more entrenched in a debate of isolationism versus how we get involved overseas, why should people in Arizona, Iowa, and that state, California, care about what is happening in Ukraine?
It comes down to our own national security interests. And as I stated earlier, it should always be America first, but not America alone. And we know that we are engaged globally. Our markets are dependent upon what's going on in Europe as well. And the destabilization of Europe by an authoritarian, murderous thug who has invaded Ukraine is absolutely unacceptable. And it does affect us here in the United States of America. Ukraine is a free and sovereign democracy. It is a country. And if we are allowing democracies to fall around the world, you will see democracy shrink and authoritarian regimes and socialism expand. And it affects us here. Just as we saw in world wars in the past, it does affect us here. So I'm going to share a story and why Ukraine is so important to me. I did reside for a time in 1989 in Ukraine on an agricultural exchange. I was one of a handful of Iowa students that were selected to live on a collective farm. And on that collective farm, the family that I lived with had no running water. They had no tractors. They were farming with horses and wagons on the collective, 1989. And it's part of the Soviet Union. They didn't have telephones, refrigerators. And in 1989, I lived on a very small farm in Iowa, my family farm. And of course, I came from humble beginnings, but it was nothing like what I saw in Ukraine. And I thought that we're both global superpowers, right? The Soviet Union and the United States, we were in a Cold War. And I just assumed as a young woman that their citizens would have the same opportunities as we did in the United States. And that assumption was absolutely wrong. So an ag exchange, when we got together that first night at the community center, the Ukrainians then were were asking us questions. And what do you think that first question was that was asked by the Ukrainians? It's an ag exchange. They asked, what is it like to be an American? And what is it like to be free? Because they had no idea what it was. The sister in my family, my Ukrainian sister, had never been off of the collective farm. There was only one phone on the collective, and the collective manager had that phone, and he would monitor any call that was made from that phone. So living in such an oppressive system, they wanted their freedom. And 2 years later, they had that freedom. They fought very hard for it. They want to be a free country, and they can win this fight with Russia if we are providing them what they need to win. We don't want to engage our blood in this war, our young men and women. And I have been overseas. I have served Operation Iraqi Freedom. We don't want to engage our soldiers, our Marines, our airmen, but the Ukrainians have already stated, we will fight to the last man and woman in Ukraine to win and expel the Russians and get rid of Vladimir Putin. So what we need to do as a United States government is enable that fight. And we can do that with long-range missiles. We can do it with surface-to-air missiles. We can do it with various platforms to allow them to push the Russians out of Ukraine. MiGs they have asked for from the Poles. We can help enable that transfer. There are so many things that we can do beyond the humanitarian aid. We have seen a number of packages pushed forward by the United States Congress, and I'm glad for that. I'm glad that we are able to support in any way that we can. However, what we need to find out is that really getting to the Ukrainians? Because there are some reports with the food aid even, just a simple example of food aid, we had allocated $100 million for food aid in one of the previous packages, and yet none of that has gone through USAID yet. It has not been distributed. We just found that out this last week, and yet the president is proposing another $1 billion of food aid to go forward. Something is broken in our system. And we have to figure out, if we as Congress are allocating these dollars, where are those dollars going? Are we really getting the equipment that we have told the Ukrainians they will get? Are they receiving it? So we have some oversight to do as Congress. I'm okay with allocating the means necessary for them to win this fight. We just have to make sure that it's being spent appropriately and what the Ukrainians actually need. So I'm all in. Let's win the war there so it doesn't spread into the rest of Europe and impact us further here in the United States.
Mr. Ambassador, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I'll just add something on Ukraine. I had an experience in Ukraine in 2014. I went over to observe the elections, and this was right after the Maidan demonstrations that got rid of the last of the Russian oligarchs, and Ukraine had a chance for the first time for freedom, and they were having parliamentary elections. And as an election observer, you kind of go around and make sure the ballot boxes are sealed and see how things are going. And I was doing that, and there was a young woman who had her daughter with her, and her daughter had a Ukrainian flag. And I was just making small talk with her, and I said, do you have childcare here, or you brought your daughter? And she said, oh no, I've got childcare, but I wanted my daughter to see. I spent my whole life either under Russian rule, Soviet rule, or under corrupt Ukrainian rule. I've spent my whole life like that, and now we're getting this as our first chance to vote, on our own in a democratic election. And I wanted my daughter, and I think the girl was 4 or 5 years old. I wanted her to see that, and see what it was like to live in a free country. And that's something that impacted me. In fact, I've got a picture of this young lady and her daughter at home, and you look at that. That's what democracy means. And well, look, we can't fight everybody's war, and we can't be the policeman of the world and all those sorts of things. But we can stand up for our friends and our partners and our allies, and we can stand up for democracies around the world, as Senator Ernst talked about. Think of it, the Munich analogy is overwrought. We talk about appeasement, and it's rolled out for sometimes for conflicts that's not really applicable. But we haven't seen something like we're seeing now in Europe, since the 1930s, where you have one neighbor, because they're bigger and stronger and more powerful and has decided they want to expand territorially, just invade their neighbor and attempt to conquer them and expand their country by conquest. I mean, that used to be a legal basis for building a country. Conquest was a basis for obtaining title to land. That went out the door. We thought in World War I, and then it didn't. And then we thought it went out the door in World War II. We had the UN Charter, which calls for the peaceful settlement of international disputes. And we haven't had that sort of it. We've had smaller regional countries invade their neighbors, whether it was Iraq and Kuwait or the Falklands and Argentina and the UK engagement. We haven't seen a major power attempt to conquer a neighbor since the 1930s and 1940s. We have to stop it, and we have to stop it now. And the way to stop it is for Ukraine to win. It's not for us to have some kind of negotiated settlement where Vladimir Putin takes off a big chunk of Ukraine. He's already taken a big chunk of Ukraine with Crimea in 2014. This is Sudetenland, right? We thought that Hitler would stop if we just give him Sudetenland. That'll satisfy him. If we just give him half of Poland, that'll satisfy him. If we just let him, have the Anschluss with Austria, that'll satisfy him. It never satisfies these dictators. They're not sated. They're going to come for more. And in fact, Putin at the outset of the war, gave a speech in which he mentioned the Baltics, and he mentioned Finland. I think the Finns woke up. He called the Finns part of the Russian family. And the Finns woke up and said, hey, wait a minute. We weren't part of the Soviet Union. We're not part of the Russian family. But Putin was going back to the 1800s when the Russians controlled Finland. And he made it very clear what he's going to do. And we've always said, hey, he's just ranting. Don't pay attention to it. He's not going to invade Ukraine. He's not going to invade the Baltics. He's not going to invade Finland. But we always say that about dictators. The number one person watching this war, there's one spectator who's watching it. It's our friend who went to Iowa, Xi Jinping. And I call him General Secretary Xi Jinping because that's where he derives his powers as the chairman of the party or the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China. He's watching this. And he's watching how we respond. And so I'm all for the pivot to Asia. I'm all for engaging and strengthening our alliances in Asia. We during the Trump administration, built out the Quad, which is a grouping of India and Australia and Japan and the U.S. to stand up to China and strengthen our allies and even non-allies, even partners like Vietnam that are sovereign and may not share all of our values but want to stand up to China. So we've got to do that. But we've got to help the people of Ukraine, because if Xi Jinping thinks that Putin got away with Ukraine, he's going to do the exact same thing with Taiwan. And so the way, if we get it's like enough already with the MiGs. I mean, the people are talking about a no-fly zone. We don't need an American-enforced no-fly zone in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have lots of pilots. They've got lots of airline pilots who are volunteering to fly the MiGs, to leave the Ukrainian airlines and fly the MiGs. Get the MiGs to the Ukrainians already. I mean, this is ridiculous. And they can have their own no-fly zone over their own sovereign country. I mean, it's not like we're going to fly, they want to fly them over Russia. They want to fly them over Ukraine and protect their citizens and their cities. That's number one. And number two, on the sanctions. We've done half-measure sanctions up until now. We haven't sanctioned Russian oil and gas. So we're talking about a $33 billion package in the Congress right now to help the Ukrainians. The Germans are going to spend $30 billion this month, $1 billion a day, buying oil and gas from the Russians. Okay, and they're going to do that month in, month out. We have got to sanction the oil and gas. So for all the sanctions, and I'm happy for them, they aren't really having an effect, because every dollar that the price of a barrel per oil goes up, Putin makes more money. He's making money off this invasion. He's making more revenue because of the invasion, because it's driven the price of oil up. So, I mean, when's the last time you went on Amazon and said, hey, I've got to get that newest thing from Russia. I heard it's really great. Like, never, okay? Because the only thing they sell is oil and gas and minerals and some agricultural products. And all of that's been exempted. And so we've got to get serious on the sanctions, and we've got to get serious on helping the Ukrainians defend themselves. They're not asking, as Senator Ernst pointed out, they're not asking for our airmen to fly the MiGs. They'll fly the MiGs themselves. So we've got to help them defend themselves. We've got to cut the Russians off from the free world economy. And that will send a message to Xi Jinping, because China cannot afford, as the Senator pointed out and as the Governor pointed out, they need the U.S. They need our intellectual property. Hopefully they'll pay for it. They need our farm products. They need a lot from the U.S. and from the free world. And if they see Russia cut off from the free world because of the invasion of Ukraine, they're going to think about themselves being cut off from the free world if they invade Taiwan. And China does not have a big enough domestic market to absorb all the products it produces. If it's cut off from Europe and from Japan and from the US, their economy collapses, and that market economy component of their growth is gone, Governor. And so if Xi Jinping understands that's the price he'd have to pay, that will deter him. So what we're doing in Ukraine, as the senator pointed out, has a big effect on what's going to happen in the Pacific, and that's why we have to win in the Ukraine. And the great thing is the Ukrainians have a lot of panache and spirit and boldness. We've watched it, and daring, and they'll win it for themselves. They just need us to be the arsenal of democracy and help them get there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Governor, I'll let you take that. And also, we're going to move into closing remarks. I'm getting the signal from the back that we're a little bit over now, so go ahead, Governor.
We are shoulder to shoulder on what we see in Ukraine, and I do believe that Ukraine's cause is our cause. We're proud at the state capitol to fly the Ukrainian flag in solidarity and support, and of course we have Ukrainian immigrants here in our state, Ukrainian students at Arizona State University, U of A, and NAU. It's incredible to hear the passion that they have for this war, for the fight that they have, the solidarity and unity as a people against Vladimir Putin. I was able to welcome Vladimir Kara-Murza to our state capitol several weeks ago. And he's a Russian dissident of great patriotism and bravery who's actually returned to Russia and has been imprisoned by Putin for completely baseless claims on the presentation that he gave to our state legislature. So I, as a country, don't believe we have the option to just look inwardly. This is a fight for liberty, freedom, and human rights. It's in Europe's backyard, but we do have examples on how we can effectively participate, whether it was the Land Lease Act or the Berlin Airlift, and we can get material and weapons to the people that have demonstrated that they are eager and willing to effectively use it. Now, we did send several pallets of protective materials, bulletproof vests, and helmets, because everything is helping right now. And we have pictures of it in Ukraine. It was harder to get there than it should be. So I don't know if it's private public partnerships or ways that we could use the opportunity to knock down barriers and reform some of these federal agencies that seem to be completely ineffective in any crisis, whether it's overseas or in a hurricane in New Orleans. But we should be taking what we can, getting them what they need so that they can fight the fight that we know that they can win. And I do believe no one knows what's next. And, you know, people say that history repeats itself, but we know that's not factual. It's the people and the actions and the decisions that are made that make the difference. And they have Vladimir Putin on his heels right now and off balance, and we should support them in every way we can.
Senator Ernst, please, closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. And I would love to thank you, Danny, for moderating this event today, and the Bastion Institute for pulling the panel together. It's really great to be here with Governor Doug Ducey in your beautiful state of Arizona. I am just so thrilled to be here. And with Ambassador Robert O'Brien, who has led in so many ways at the federal government level and informing really important decisions that have been made by previous administrations. And so I just hope that we can leave today with some optimism. I know that so many times folks will ask me, how is it serving in the United States Senate when we have 40-year high inflation, when we see these gas prices skyrocketing, when we see foreign policy falling apart under the hands of President Joe Biden? But the optimism is there, is that America is the greatest nation on the face of the planet. And I recognize that, and so many of our allies and friends around the globe recognize that as well. That's why the Ukrainians do turn to the United States for leadership. That's why others turn to us. That's why Taiwan has always asked for our assistance, is because we can be there, and we need to be there. We shouldn't be that isolationist country because we are powerful, and we need to regain that strength on the global stage and push back against those near-peer adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, and others. The power and strength comes from our people. And even though we may see weak leadership at the top right now, we do have the opportunity to succeed, to unleash American energy, to unleash American innovation. This is our time to step forward and promote great ideas, great solutions, and regain that status around the globe that we once had. We can really be that shining light for everyone around the world. And I'm just so proud of who we are as a nation. You may hear others on the other side that will denigrate this incredible country, but we offer opportunity to every citizen that resides here. So thank you for allowing me to participate today. It's such an honor, again, to be with so many great giants here in the state of Arizona. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ernst, and definitely can be optimistic about the wonderful things happening in Arizona and Iowa and the fact that California has good beaches. So go ahead.
Well,
Pastor.
thank you. Look, I'm just privileged to be on the stage here with these three other great Americans. I tried to hire Danny when I was in the administration, but he wanted to stay in Arizona, and I understand that with his family. But I would have caused a rupture with the governor, but I tried to get him back to Washington. But he's terrific. You're doing a great job at the chamber, and thank you for moderating. And Governor Ducey and I have become friends over the years. And when we talk about America, one of the Americans that I think of is a young woman from Arizona named Kayla Mueller, who left college and went to Turkey to work with Physicians Without Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and other relief agencies, and help the people who were suffering in Syria. And went there for no other reason but to help alleviate human suffering. And unfortunately, she was taken captive by ISIS and ultimately killed by that brutal leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And I got to know Carl and Marcia, her parents, and Doug, Governor Ducey, has become good friends and as a supporter of that family. And I've had a chance to come back here to Arizona. So when I think about the goodness of America that you talk about, Joni, Senator Ernst, that I think of someone like Kayla Mueller. That's the goodness of America and what she brought from Arizona to the world and paid a big price for it. But that legacy lives on. And Senator Ernst, thank you for inviting me. It's anytime Joni invites me to do anything, she knows I'll fly anywhere for her because she's such a great senator and great American. And you've been so great on national defense issues and supporting our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. I have two daughters. One's in the Georgia National Guard and one's in the California Air Guard, and a JAG officer and a pilot. And they look at Senator Ernst and the career she's had, and she's an inspiration to them. So thank you for inviting me to join you. And I'll close by echoing what Joni had to say, is that, look, America is fundamentally strong. We're going through some tough times. We've been through tough times before. We've always come out of it. And this is the greatest country in the history of the world. There's just no question about it. And you don't see people getting in the wheel wells of airplanes at LAX and trying to get out of America. You see people flooding into this country trying to come here. We're a great country. We've got to be proud of the country that we are, and we've got to lead in the world. And when America is strong and when America leads, not only are we safer, not only are our partners and allies safer, but people who are behind the curtain, whether it was in the old days with the dissidents in the Soviet Union or today in the gulags that have been reopened by Vladimir Putin's Russia, or in the labor camps in Xinjiang, we're that beacon, we're that shining city on the hill that they can look to for hope. And so I've got tremendous faith and confidence in this country, and with leaders like Governor Ducey and Senator Ernst, who are still in office. I'm a has-been, I'm out of office, but this country is going to make a great comeback, and so I'm confident, and I want to leave with, notwithstanding the challenges that we face, there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of greatness in this country, and again, Kayla is one of those examples coming right here from Arizona. So thank you for having me, thank you for inviting me, and great to spend some time with you here in the desert.
Thank you. Governor Ducey, I'll give you the final word.
Well, Danny, again, I want to say thank you for hosting. And, I knew Joni Ernst before she was Joni Ernst, before she had run for office, and we were in a setting where we were able to discuss what was motivating us to run and to get in the arena. And I just want to say how proud I am to have you as a friend, the work that you have done in the United States Senate, what a leading voice you have been for freedom and reform, and the success that you're having while bringing people into our cause. You've got a great way, Senator. Thank you. And Ambassador, I got to know you through the Mueller family, and that was the best of what our federal government could do to reach out to young, worthy Americans that were taking our cause around the world and not doing it under the cover of an honorific or an appointment, but in missionary work. So I want to thank you for what you've done, the way you represented and kept our country safe during your time. And I know Danny likes to beat up on California. He actually helped me write the line in my second State of the State when I said I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my partner in growing Arizona's economy, and that was then California Governor Jerry Brown. But I think it's important that we also remember that Ronald Reagan said, had the Pilgrims landed on the West Coast, they would have never bothered to discover the rest of the country. No one leaves California because they want to. Yet today there is an exodus to places like Arizona, Texas, Florida, and Tennessee. The policies that we're talking about at the state level that in many ways replicate the policies of the previous administration work, and they welcome Americans and they provide opportunities to climb the economic ladder, for children to have choice in education, for parents to have a say in what is happening. And if I had any wish, and we of course want to look to the future, but we also have some of the answers from the past. And if we could invoke a bit of the founders and James Madison and this idea that the powers of the federal government would be few and specific. And I do think our federal government should focus on national defense and foreign policy. But we really got to see over the last 2 years what could happen in the laboratories of democracy. So the way to break up the cartel is, rather than trying to have every answer for every question that exists in every setting, to push the dollars and the resources back to the states and let the governors compete. I believe we would get even better people running for state legislature, for school board, for statewide elected office, if they had that power to really differentiate in their state. We've done all we can, and I know there's more that can happen in the state of Arizona, but if you look at those states right now, the top 10 states for net in-migration, the top 10 states for lower taxes, lighter regulation, we know Americans vote with their feet. You would see it's those governors that believe in the people, believe in a decentralized government, and believe that the power should not come from Washington, D.C., but from the strength and growth from their local and state economies. And to me, that would be the way forward for us to get out of this cul-de-sac and division that we're in right now, is to let the states compete and let the citizens make their decision on the policies that they want.
I can't end any better than that. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. Stay tuned for more of our events in the future. You can check out the Bastion Institute at their website, and please go home and talk to your neighbors about today's conversation. Thank you.